He's not wearing his, he's not cosplaying middle school vice principal this time. He's cosplaying middle school vice principal who got fired for selling weed.
Actually, Jason, the reason their profit margins are going to be not as good is because they're going to put out less produce.
That's not what a profit margin is.
When you have the rich complaining about not making enough money, you have Pat Socks jumping on them, defending it.
I bet you were supposed to be dunking on him, Caleb. Just set it up so he would dunk on you in your own fucking video. He used to do a much better job of pretending to be a communist.
Not degrowth. So these farmers grow food, are having policy.
That's not the growth we're talking about, dickhead.
I've seen them dishing out that nice bull brew. The definition of the working class was pulled out of Sasha Dugan's house. Reckon I'll pass. Nice bull ghouls, at night they dream of burning down your shoe. Cause you know that when the shit goes down, that red veneer is gonna fade to brown. They'll go to town, watch them saluting their red, white, blue flag. Their revolution is nothing but lag. If I may be so blunt, they're just a bunch of cunts. Are these Nazgul ghouls? Just a lot of petty bourgeois tools. 100 years ago they jumped the shark. So just tell them fuck this for a laugh. Don't be a mark. Nazgul ghouls, fuck those Nazgul ghouls. Just can't be fucked with those Nazgul ghouls. Fucking Nazgul ghouls. Just can't be fucked with those Nazgul ghouls. Fucking Nazgul ghouls. Just can't be fucked with those Nazgul ghouls. Fucking Nazgul ghouls. Just can't be fucked with those Nazgul ghouls. Fucking Nazgul ghouls.
Yes, actually. They are trying to impose policies on the Dutch farmers that will reduce their crop output. And they will have less. They will produce less food. That is degrowth, Jason. That is degrowth.
Again, this isn't... None of these things are that.
To which now, this is starting to get to the point where I'm going to have to ask, are these Malthusians in the room with us right now?
Okay, I can't help it.
Are these degrowth people in the room with us right now?
That's such a poor delivery of that joke.
Caleb, I've seen your delivery of jokes. You do not get to critique other people's delivery. That was actually not terrible. Like, you don't even know how to structure a fucking joke. You put the punchline first, and then, 5 minutes later, you tell people, actually, you're telling them a fucking joke.
It's really a poor delivery of that joke, right? But
that's all he's got. That's impressive to me, because see, if he was actually serious about saying that this is degrowth and explaining what that is, he could provide some kind of argumentation. And if he wants to be serious and say this is definitely Malthusianism or whatever, then he could provide some argumentation on that. Instead, he's just critiquing his delivery of the joke, which while quite flat, is still considerably better than Caleb Maupin's efforts. I mean, he's only ever unintentionally funny.
But continue.
Because this whole degrowth thing seems to be something wholly manufactured by you. I'm sure you have found tweets from a couple nut jobs in a very few small, nearly insignificant sources, and you think it's this global, worldwide conspiracy by the...
Yeah. See, and again, this is not how you edit people out of context. That's not how that works. Because he's actually made an entire, once again, a very valid point that Muppet is not going to have any answer to, because he is literally saying exactly
a few nut jobs. Didn't Richard Wolff just make a video promoting degrowth?
That's the fact that there are leftists promoting degrowth does not mean that this thing that we're talking about right now is that thing. There are leftists promoting communism. That doesn't mean that the thing we're talking about here is communism. These are two very different things. If I go on Twitter, I can find people who are advertising pizza. That doesn't mean we're looking at pizza right now, Caleb. That's not how that works.
I think he did. Let's pull up some interesting things. Just a few isolated nut jobs, right? No one's talking about degrowth, right?
That's not what he said either. He didn't say nobody's talking about degrowth. He said that in this context, nobody's calling this degrowth. Nobody's saying that this is degrowth, because it actually isn't that thing. And in terms of degrowth being some sort of actual policy, no, that's not happening. And this isn't an example of it. You'd have to find another example, because what this is you've got a change in the fertilizer being used because it's better for the climate, supposedly. I mean, I can't evaluate... that's the thing. And the other thing that he, of course, never acknowledges is that there's the degrowth that, eco-socialists and leftists of various stripes have been talking about. And then there's the liberal version, because every time liberals get their hands on something that people outside of liberalism have spent time developing as an idea, they fuck it up. They completely and utterly fuck it up. And that's happened to degrowth. You got to the extent that a lot of the leftists who were major degrowth advocates are kind of saying, yeah, we don't want that term anymore. You ruined it. It smells like you now.
Right. It's all just, what is this book that is widely available? This is one of the main socialist books you can find at American bookstores. What is this book? What is it called here? We got...
Okay. Not actually familiar with these authors, but okay. And I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been in a bookstore. I haven't actually been really in a shop for more than 30 seconds since February 2020, because of this fucking pandemic. So, and I don't feel I've seen books about degrowth, leftist books about degrowth. I have not seen this one. But again, the fact that there is a book that exists and is being sold in bookshops, which is kind of a normal place where people sell books, that does not mean that what we're talking about is the thing in that book.
The Future is Degrowth, a guide to a world beyond capitalism. That is one of the main socialist books being sold right now.
A neat font, by the way. That's kind of a cool font. I'd like to know what that is.
Equating critique of capitalism with degrowth. Oh, but what else? What else, right? What else?
Well, no, it wasn't equating. It's saying that their proposal for an end to capitalism, for a replacement to capitalism, involves degrowth. They're not saying that that is inherently what a critique of capitalism is. These, come up with better material.
What else we got here? What else? What other popular leftist titles might be promoting this? What else do we...
any of you in chat, I mean, we've got some people, I think, some fairly well-read people. Any of you familiar with that book?
Got there. Oh, we've got, what else? We got...
Oh, God. See, again, what I was saying about liberalism coming in and fucking these things up, forward by the Rupert Reed of Extinction Rebellion, who have repeatedly veered into eco-fascism on multiple occasions, apart from having this completely unrequited love affair with cops. So, the thing is, don't say that, because he would just publish books every week, and all it would be like it would be just posts. Like his Bread 2 serves imperialism, it's like just a fucking Reddit thread practically. Except Reddit's generally better written. He'll just like copy paste shit into his desktop publishing program and put it on Amazon. And then when somebody notices something anti-Semitic in it, he'll jack up the price so nobody can see it.
Less is more. How to say...
Okay, Jason Hickel is speaking of my difficulties with names. This is a name that confuses the shit out of me, because is there a guy in Muppets orbit called Jackson Hinkle? Yeah, I mean, Extinction Rebellion had some, like, they had some good ideas, but the trouble is, for one thing, they were telling people that cops were their friends. They had this whole idea that, getting arrested is no big deal. It's a great idea, and, you really succeeded in your protest when you get arrested. And that sort of thing. And then they would, like, talk about, so-called overpopulation and all sorts of... I mean, they got into some pretty racist stuff. Yeah, you say that. But Caleb Maupin has actually shown up in chat here. Like, last year sometime, out of nowhere, he shows up in chat demanding that I debate him. And then I blocked him because, no, fuck that. And he goes off on one in Twitter about how cowardly I am, how terrified I supposedly was. He takes a screenshot that he thinks is of me reading his chat. But actually, at the time, I was playing chess and I just blundered a rook. I didn't see him until like a minute or two later. But he was like, that I'm afraid of debating him. And it's like, yeah, no, fuck off, man.
Say How Degrowth Will Save the World by Jason Hickel. And it's endorsed by what group there? Extinction Rebellion.
Wow, yeah, and if Extinction Rebellion makes government policy, obviously. That's why they're getting arrested, because that's what happens when you make government policy. You get arrested. Well, I mean, the other thing about Extinction Rebellion in Britain, they basically crashed the activist legal defense infrastructure. Like... they essentially refused to coordinate on, like, legal advice, on legal assistance and anything, or planning with groups like, I think, Green and Black Cross and things like that. But then they relied almost entirely on GABC and other leftist legal defense collectives, to the extent, I mean, there were so many of these fucking cases that they just collapsed under the effort, and they weren't really getting any assistance with it. Even though Extinction Rebellion was just bathing in donations at the time, and nobody was kicking anything over to them for the costs. I mean, honestly, the idea of, like, mass civil disobedience, mass direct action to force action on the climate isn't a bad one, but Extinction Rebellion kind of, I have to say that my experience with them, what I saw with them in Britain in particular, just kind of sucks.
One of the main left-wing groups that's going around protesting global warming is a degrowth organization.
I wouldn't call them left-wing. I mean, just about every leftist who I know who's had any contact with them is highly critical of them. And again, they say, like, eco-fascist stuff. It's all very liberal. But to Caleb Maupin, there's no difference. Like, everything is just one big blob.
Wow. But it's all in our heads, right?
Yeah, well, if it's in books, that means it has to be happening.
Degrowth isn't a thing, Caleb. You just made up degrowth.
nobody said that you made up degrowth, you dickhead. I mean, there's the point that you're not using the term correctly, and that this thing that we're talking about here, that isn't degrowth. That nobody's saying that you just made it up. It's just that you don't know what you're talking about. You're very ignorant on subjects that you spend a lot of time talking about, and it's funny, you make sure to be pictured in front of this big fucking library, and the more you talk, the more I wonder if you've ever opened any of the fucking books.
It's like he didn't even deliver that joke very effectively. Degrowth is really being pushed hard in.
It turns out there is like 1 degree of separation at this point between Caleb Maupin and Richard Spencer. I don't remember exactly how that worked, what the connection there was, but anti-Maupin action on Twitter's got it.
Leftist circles right now, right? It's really, really, really being pushed hard. Michael Moore pushed it in his plan.
Oh, well, if Michael Moore pushed it, obviously that's what, like, fucking communists are talking about, because communists just love Michael Moore. Yeah, in this year of, 2006? What is it? 2004? I mean, this guy, it's like he is forever... It's like the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine, and he's looking at images of about 2008, and the prophets are going, "You exist here."
Planet of the Humans documentary. I'm sorry, degrowth is everywhere in left-wing circles, but I guess
the people you've listed, only one of them, I can only say that 2 out of 3 are not in left-wing circles unless we define that pretty fucking broadly. And one I can't say anything about because I've never heard of them, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but...
I guess I just made it all up, right? I just made it all up.
National bankers. But trust me, there really is no such thing. Actually...
Is BlackRock an international bank?
No. That's not his point.
And did they push degrowth policies?
No. Well, they're an international investment company, yes. Did they push degrowth policies? No. They push things that you're misrepresenting as degrowth because you don't understand what growth is and you don't understand what degrowth is.
Going on. In fact, we keep going forward and driving this entire planet towards its inevitable destruction.
Well, the fact, Jason, that you are just confirming exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, this should be
right?
good.
Did you see what he just did there? He said nobody believes in degrowth. It's obscure. And actually,
That's not what he said. That literally is not what he said. You just played it back. You had to edit this thing. You know what he said. What he said was that this isn't degrowth and nobody in power is actually doing degrowth. And that's true. That is actually true.
let's keep going forward, and that's bad. Well, if you think growth is bad, Jason, you're promoting degrowth.
Well, nobody has said they think growth just is bad. I've not heard anyone say that just growth in general as a broad abstract concept is bad. I don't think any degrowth advocate, any serious degrowth advocate would say that growth inherently in all circumstances as an abstract concept is just objectively bad. The question is what the growth is, because the problem with capitalist metrics like growth is they mostly tell us what's good for capital, what's good for capitalists. Like, all growth means is there's more economic activity going on. It tells us absolutely nothing about what that economic activity is, what's being done with it. Like, I mean, this pandemic is probably a huge driver of growth to some extent, although, I mean, simply because there's all sorts of economic activity that is caused by the fact that huge numbers of people are getting sick and dying. And since we're talking about just economic transactions in the abstract without looking at what they do and whether people are benefiting from the fact that they exist, that's probably a driver of growth. That doesn't make that good. I mean, this is like such basic stuff. One of the first things that I learned when I started to get into fucking like communism and anarchism and stuff was to look critically at economic indicators like growth, to understand that just because that these indicators present a narrative that is based on the interests of capitalists and does not actually reflect all of our interests. He seems to have missed that fucking lesson. And I would like to think that maybe at some point in the fucking WWP or something, somebody would have taken him aside and said, just because the Wall Street Journal relies on an economic indicator doesn't mean line goes up is good.
The idea that growth is bad, that somehow human beings should have less.
That's okay. Those two things don't follow from each other.
That's called degrowth, Jason.
No, that is God. This is like, there's so many things wrong with that. First of all, okay, the idea that growth is bad, again, degrowth advocates aren't just talking about growth in the abstract. There is quite a bit more detail to go into there. He doesn't know what growth means. We saw that last night. I mean, he seems to think that growth just means like crops being grown. Like literally, he had some point that he said that that's what it was. And reducing the number of economic transactions going on does not mean people have less, because there's huge numbers of these transactions every day that benefit nobody. I mean, apart from capitalists. Capitalists get rich off of them, but none of us see any improvement in our living standard from them, and if they went away, we would not see any decrease in our living standard, because it's nothing to do with us. It's just money changing hands. Money, that isn't inherently a good thing.
That's what you're promoting. But continue.
Sorry.
So the protests have certainly started to get out of hand. A teenager was shot after he was driving a tractor towards the police. Now, of course,
Oh, well, okay. We're talking about tractors now. Caleb, watch Caleb's hands, because he's got a thing about tractors.
CAB, but if you drive a tractor at the police, you know what's going to happen.
I mean, also, like, fuck that. First of all, a tractor? That's pretty slow. They had time to get out of the way. I mean, yeah, that's the sort of thing that is likely to result in cops doing some violence on you, but I don't know that I would be so blasé about it, even though I don't actually support these protesters and shit. Fuck the police.
And if you're willing to make that sacrifice, then that's totally up to you. But
no comment. That just doesn't deserve a comment. I mean, Mr. Leather Jacket there with his Antifa flag. That part, no comment, Jason. No comment.
Yeah, okay, so he's got nothing.
Actions create very obvious consequences.
Oh, they do, Jason.
Especially when you're doing it in favor of...
Oh, they do, Mr. Anderson.
The rich. And so...
against another faction of the rich that's way more powerful, that wants to drive down the world food supply and make...
No. And first of all, like, again, he acknowledges at the very start, actually, practically at the start, that what we're talking about isn't, the working class struggle. It's a conflict amongst rich people. And he has decided that and his whole thing, and he explains this in his books, he's explained it elsewhere, is he thinks that the far-right reactionary sectors of the ruling class are somehow the underdog, and that therefore it is appropriate for communists to support the most reactionary anti-communist right-wing elements of the ruling class because they're the underdog in capitalism. Which isn't even strictly true. There's a lot of money behind them. But also, if you're looking to get rid of capitalism, you're looking to get rid of the capitalist class, then you kind of support none of them.
Make everyone a lot poorer because they think growth is bad, because they want to stay at the top of the planet. And there's already a food crisis going on, and millions of people in the third world are going to die.
Yeah, because that's right. Fucking Africa is totally dependent on the food production in the Netherlands, which is also like the exact opposite of how that works. In fact, one of the Netherlands' biggest exports is chocolate, and guess where they get the cash crop cacao from that they process into Dutch chocolate that they send all over the world? Yeah, they get that shit from Africa. That's how it works. That we are actually, the reason there's a food crisis is because farmland in Latin America, farmland in Africa, and a lot of parts of Asia is being used to feed the global, the imperial core, where instead of being used to feed people locally.
But continue, Jason. Continue.
So forth. Now, if this really was about degrowth and all that, why are these pansocks not up in arms now about China?
Well, how about the...
Well, okay. See, now he's done pretty well here, because I actually kind of wanted to hear what he was about to say there, because I think that this was probably going to be a point that he would have trouble answering. Let me see if he allows him to actually...
The fact that China has a war on deserts and they're creating more farmland than ever. How about the fact that China has lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty? China is doing the opposite of degrowth. They've eradicated extreme poverty.
You see, and the thing is, that's the difference there. This is what we're talking about. There are different kinds of growth. There's a difference between growth that allows people access to, the economic system who were previously completely marginalized from it. That's growth. But when you make money just kind of shifting housing from one vulture fund to another, shit like that, that also accounts for growth. It is a totally bullshit metric. It does not tell you anything about whether anything good is going on.
They're waging war on deserts and creating farmland. They're advancing fusion energy, which could get us out of the nightmare of fossil fuels, which all these people that claim they're so worried about global warming and carbon emissions, I never see them supporting fusion energy.
Well, what the hell are we supposed to do, actually? First of all, fusion energy is not currently an option. I mean, it might actually be an option down the road. It has to actually get to the point where it can be used at a commercial scale. And I have a feeling, since he loves to go on about fusion energy, I mean, it's not that he knows anything about it, but he seems to be quite big on it. I have a feeling that if it was anywhere near being able to be commercially exploitable on the regional or local level at all, he would have just said that. But the fact is, it's a technology that does not exist yet. And we don't know how long it's going to be before that technology exists, if indeed it ever does. So we have to, the IPCC, meanwhile, says, if we don't get to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, that is our last chance, viewed optimistically, to avoid the absolute worst of climate change. And so we can't reckon with something that doesn't exist. Obviously, if it works, then that would be a really good thing, potentially. I don't really know the ins and outs of it. There are probably downsides that I don't know anything about, because I don't really know a lot about fusion, but that would probably help. But on the other hand, we can't, when we're talking about what to do about something that we have less than a decade to sort out, we can't base that on technologies we don't actually fucking have. Hello, Jane Doe. Yeah, the nuclear reactors you find anywhere else is are fission energy. Yeah, exactly. I mean, fusion, and the reason it's not commercially exploited is it's just not there yet. I mean, the trouble is, the last I read about it, the trouble is that a hell of a lot more energy goes into it than you're able to get out of it. It requires so much energy to do it that you're not able to there's not a whole lot left over in order to actually power anything other than the reactor itself. And welcome to the stream, Jane Doe, although you're coming in towards the end, about 11 minutes to go.
Just saying, right? It's always, global warming just means everyone has to be poorer. Never see them promoting China's
And nobody's saying everyone.
work around fusion energy. But continue.
China has decided to take tons of farmland and return it to nature.
Actually, they're doing.
Okay. Now, the thing is, they're saying the two opposite things, two directly contradictory claims about something in China that I don't actually know about. So let me see. Is China rewilding farmland? Season. Okay, I mean, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I have no idea. I'm not seeing anything immediately that says one way or another. And we don't have a whole lot of time left. So if anyone in chat knows anything about that, I'd love to hear about it. But
doing the opposite.
I mean, I'm not inclined to believe either of these doofuses, but I'm more inclined to disbelieve Muppet because apart from just being dishonest, he also doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about 90% of the time.
They've taken tons of deserts and made them arable land. They've increased their crop outputs hugely, vast expansion in their food production apparatus. There was hunger every day, malnutrition all the time before the revolution. Millions of Chinese people have been lifted out of poverty.
Okay, see, again, there are different kinds of growth, and he really just does. I mean, he does this a lot, where he will treat the living standards of people in the U.S. and the living standards of people in Africa and Latin America, elsewhere in the global South, as being the same thing for the purposes of talking about things like degrowth and other decolonization, stuff like that. And that doesn't work like that.
Look at what China is doing right now, not just in China, but around the world, building infrastructure. It's not degrowth, my friend. That is not what degrowth looks like.
Yeah, well, but you wouldn't know degrowth. You don't know what degrowth looks like. It could look like that for all you know.
You think that...
I mean, it doesn't, but...
Farmers in the European countries being told they have to produce less is not degrowth. But
also, he keeps on talking about this like this is a novel thing. Farmers are always being told they have to produce less. In fact, there's a problem, because the problem is that farmers are constantly... Sometimes when they have overproduction, which happens fairly regularly, then you end up with a problem where they end up getting paid not to grow stuff. I don't know if this is still going on right now. It would surprise me. Like in the U.S., for example, dairy farmers being paid not to produce milk because there's already so much of it on the market. I mean, that's kind of telling farmers not to produce something. That is something that goes on all the time because there are fluctuations in the harvest. The weather's different, all sorts of factors that come into it from year to year. And you don't really know until fairly late in the game whether you're going to have too much or too little of certain things. Because it's a matter of an aggregate of everybody who's producing that's going to be delivering to that particular market. And so that's not unusual.
But somehow China lifting...
Be told not to produce something or to produce less.
Millions and millions of people out of poverty and building infrastructure all over the world and eradicating deserts and making them into, arable land.
Which, I mean, eradicating desert ecosystems isn't inherently a great idea, because we need those ecosystems too, first of all. And it's interesting that when China does this, see, I mean, this is also like traditional Zionist propaganda is about making the desert bloom. I mean, and it was bullshit on a number of levels, but but on the ecological level, it's also just totally unsustainable. It ends up not being a great idea.
Somehow that is degrowth. You're just completely losing me now, Jason.
So they're deliberately destroying farmland. And because we know that material reality is now infinite, according to Maupin.
That is a fair statement. He thinks that infinite capitalist growth is possible without any ecological consequences. And that is another example of where he departs from anything that remotely resembles Marxism-Leninism and is very clearly taking a LaRouchian stand. Yeah. I mean, there's the advancing of the desert, which is a bad thing that is potentially like threatening a lot of ecosystems. Like in Chile, that's a huge problem. The desert there, because of the water crisis, which has a lot to do with water theft, fundamentally. The water being monopolized by these large landowners of the sort that fucking Caleb Maupin's here defending. But also because of climate change, you have the Atacama Desert advancing slowly southward and, devouring other ecosystems in its wake.
Why are they not up in arms about the Chinese degrowth policy that's now being put through, that they are so adamantly...
Okay, well, let me just see. China degrowth policy. I'm just curious. A Chinese degrowth style movement called the New Rural Reconstruction Movement. Okay, so there's something to what Unruhe is saying here, apparently. I hadn't heard of it, but...
Against.
Because it's not degrowth, because they're raising people up out of poverty, because they're...
God, you say these things as if... God, I mean, he just repeats himself over and over again on these things, and he wasn't right the first time, and it doesn't improve through the repetition. You see,
doing the opposite of degrowth, building infrastructure, because that's not what China's doing. I'm sorry, it's like, I mean, you look at Dutch farmers being told to put out less food, and that's not degrowth. But somehow, China raising millions of people out of poverty and constructing around the world is degrowth. I'm lost, Jake.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the first true thing that he said the whole time. He is lost. He doesn't understand any of these things because he doesn't understand what growth is. And so, therefore, he doesn't understand what degrowth is. He just thinks growth good, which is like the fucking MSNBC level understanding of economics. I mean, just like a fucking mainstream neoclassical capitalist bullshit economics. Not even any kind of leftist critique of mainstream capitalist economics. He clearly does not have the slightest fucking clue what any of these things are. Yeah, there's a lot that's dystopian about this world we're living in right now. It's kind of fucked up. We've got our work cut out for us as revolutionaries, I tend to think.
Jason.
Where is it?
When hopes will rise
Why aren't they
to
up
the
in
occasion.
arms about this and instead coming to the aid of rich landlords, very much like what they did with the trucker convoy in Canada.
Which was organized by neo-Nazis and had hardly any actual truckers in it.
The so-called Freedom Convoy being led by a guy who said that the numbers of dead in the Holocaust were exaggerated, that Caleb didn't know about because he didn't research the guy who was leading the protest.
That's not a very good use of air quotes.
Which very much tells you that he's either a liar or he's
well, he is
incompetent.
Is that. It's not either or. He brings the best of both worlds. He's full of shit, and he doesn't know shit. So he doesn't even know his own content. He doesn't know what he's full of. That is a very complicated philosophical problem there, to not know shit and be full of it.
Or maybe my whole criticism was that leftists should have been leading the protest, Jason.
Well, I am... What? Yeah, I mean, if it had been a leftist protest, as opposed to a bunch of Nazis cosplaying as truckers, yeah, that would have been something worthy of support, but the thing is, it wasn't. It was fascists doing it for, like, right-wing reasons. So, no, it's not worthy of support.
But maybe when working people are angry at the government and are trying to assert their rights,
this is kind of funny that he puts it this way, because working people are kind of pissed off at the government over the stripping of bodily autonomy and abortion rights. And when working people are pissed off about that, he says that communists should just sort of sneer on the sidelines. So, let's see, where...
Or maybe my whole criticism was that leftists should have been leading the protest, Jason. But maybe when working people are angry at the government...
Okay, it's worth remembering that at the very beginning of this, he was pointing out that we shouldn't care that it isn't working people, that it is in fact large landowners, that they're not farmers, but rich motherfuckers who own land and employ people who do farming. And now he switched over and say, oh, when working people are mad at the government. After he got done saying, just at the very beginning, it shouldn't matter that these people are the petty bourgeoisie, or the bourgeoisie, because they're the good side of the capitalist class and all this bullshit.
And are trying to assert their rights, maybe that's when communists should be leading them and not just defending the status quo.
And let's remember, he specifically said at the beginning of this that it was all about the profit margins of these large landowners. He didn't know what profit margins are. That became very quickly apparent. But that's what this is about, according to him, is the profit margins of large landowners who employ viciously hyper-exploited Eastern European workers to do agricultural labor. And he's saying communists should be leading that protest for the profit margins of large landowners. He has a very interesting understanding of what communism is.
Maybe that's what I said. Did that ever occur to you?
Well, I mean, it isn't. It actually really isn't what you said. You said quite the opposite at the very beginning of this endless fucking video.
Did it ever occur to you that, that our job isn't simply to defend the liberal order from conservative opposition? Did it ever occur to you that...
Okay, and how exactly is defending the a sector of the capitalist class against environmental laws that might cut into their profits in any way opposing the liberal order?
That the reason that these people that are angry at the status quo are rallying around the right wing is because leftists like you have dropped the ball and just...
No, it's probably because they're large landowners and the right wing is much more straightforward about defending their class interests. Class interest, Caleb, have you heard of it? It's where people, depending on, okay, so you have these things called the means of production. And you got some people, see, who own that shit and make a living off of nothing more than the fact that they own it. Then you got other people, see, Caleb, who they have to work for a living. That's why they're called the working class. Now, when you see members of the capitalist class, that's the people who own shit and make money by owning shit, Caleb, protesting against laws that, as you said, cut into their profits. Could it possibly be that it isn't, that they actually do understand their class interests and are acting in defense of them? Like, what exactly is a communist supposed to say to them? That is going to convince them that they shouldn't be defending their class interests. I mean, if there's actually a magic word that you could say to capitalists to get them to just give up on defending their class interests, like the CDC has given up on even pretending to care about COVID and monkeypox, then it's about time somebody told us what it was so we can just go around saying it.
It's become shills of the establishment. Continue, please.
Yeah, I love this continue, please. He's just editing a video out of context.
So, I think it's really important to understand not only just exactly who these farmers are, what they represent, what they're doing, and what they're about, but to also understand the context in which it appears.
Yeah, I have to say, I really, really hate that Jason Unruhe is coming out of this looking like the sensible one. But, I mean, Caleb Maupin has that effect. There's the Caleb Maupin bump. Anyone who has even the slightest comprehension of what's going on in a subject that you debate with Caleb Maupin on is going to end up looking better as a result, just because he's just so fucking ignorant.
Like, you mean a global food crisis that we're on the brink of, where people all over Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world are not going to have food because of U.S. imperialism? And
okay, see, earlier he was saying that it was because they passed this law that required them to use more climate-friendly fertilizers. That people in the global south were facing a food crisis because, they can't get their food exports from the Netherlands, because that's what the Netherlands does. They export food to Africa. Except their main agricultural export turns out to be cut flowers. And their food exports pretty much all go, apart from things like their cheeses, which go everywhere, and their beer, which goes everywhere, everything else, all their other agro-export goes to neighboring countries, especially Germany. That was his explanation for why, whatever the hell he thinks the left is, should be getting behind these Dutch landowners who are fighting to defend their profit margins.
And because of their degrowth organic policies they forced on countries like Sri Lanka, and because of the war that they fomented, the NATO conflict they fomented in Ukraine, there's going to be shortages of food. And the context, that's what the context of this is, Jason. That's what the context is. Yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't actually say anything there, Caleb. So that's what the context is. He already said all this shit, or versions of it, or things that actually directly contradicted it 3 or 4 times throughout this video. And I was like, yeah, so maybe we should understand that context. That's what the context is, Jason. Yeah, which is, Jason must feel just so dunked on right now.
Efforts to not destroy the planet by switching to another kind of fertilizer and having regulations is not...
And drive down the food supply at a time we're already having food shortages.
Yeah, okay, this bullshit, he's said this more than once, and the food shortages we're seeing, the issue, first of all, again, the Dutch agricultural sector is not actually supplying any place that is currently threatened by food shortages. Second of all, he hasn't actually provided any evidence that this will in fact reduce the food supply. And third of all, Nobody who's having shortages right now, nobody who's going hungry right now is going hungry because there's not enough food. There is more food than we can eat being produced every year. There's more food than we can eat being produced every year, and half of it gets thrown out before it ever sees the retail markets. I mean, he's just wrong on so many levels.
It's a little bit of a concern, isn't it? I mean, isn't Jason supposed to be a third worldist?
Yeah, what? Yeah, Jason, come on. Aren't you worried about the fact that people in the third world aren't going to be able to eat those Dutch tulips that they survive on, and the gouda that they melt on it, the tulip gouda melt that is so big and yeah, in fucking nowhere because none of this works that way. You dickhead.
What kind of third worldist wants to starve people in the third world because that's what a bunch of wealthy, white environmentalists want to do?
Okay, and again, what does this have to do with anything? Who in the third world is not eating because the Netherlands introduced some new standards on fertilizer?
What kind of third worldist wants crop output to go down?
Which he has in no way demonstrated would be the result of using this fertilizer.
Because that's what BlackRock and Bill and Melinda Gates want to do. I'm sorry. I mean, this guy's supposed to be a third worldist, right? We're all evil first world privileged people. But he doesn't seem interested in actually helping people in the third world. I think he wants...
I mean, did he bother to look up? Like, I didn't even have to just... I mean, I having lived in a neighboring country and, had to look around a supermarket, I just kind of already knew that the Netherlands isn't supplying anyone outside of neighboring countries with food. Qué pelotudez, weón. Qué pelotudez. Yeah. He's gonna teach people in Moscow how to get away from the slime.
To starve them. He wants to starve the third world in order to please a bunch of wealthy people in the first world.
I'm sure that's exactly how he thinks of it too.
Because it's trendy among hip liberals in the first world.
Same thing as lining people up and having to shoot them.
Yes, actually, depriving people of food, Jason, is the same thing. If you kill people by mass starvation, if you impose policies that reduce global food output.
Except, God, this is such bullshit. He repeats the same bullshit over and over again, and then I feel like a bit uncomfortable because it leads to me having to repeat the same corrections. Food output is so we could cut food output down significantly as long as everything that was produced actually made it to retail. The problem is that the food, it's not that there isn't food, it's that there is not food for them. See, I think his aspirations are more on the he wants to have his own little cult of personality, and that's why he's going around and finding all these just truly naive, inexperienced young people who will be impressed by the fact that he wears suits and he knows how to sound authoritative, even though what he's saying is absolutely just a hot mess of complete bullshit and ignorance. He wants to be the great leader of something.
That is like lining people up and shooting them. That's basically what it is,
Which has nothing at all to do with what we're talking about.
Creating a food crisis and using the food crisis as an opportunity to push these organic policies that reduce crop output, as Samantha Power indicated they want to do. That is killing people. That is what it is, Jason. You are going to kill people in the third world
by reducing Dutch crop outputs.
Because the Dutch farmers are racist.
Because the fact that they're racist completely outweighs the fact that that their biggest export crop is not even food. Cool. Welcome. Always glad to see new people here. I've been having quite a few lately. That last video that I put out, there was just a clip show of this fool. Really took off in ways I wasn't expecting.
It's not Malthusianism. That's just trying to save the planet.
Yeah. Driving down the population.
You have not actually explained how any of this is driving down the population. And the thing is, I mean, as I pointed out in like the subtitles to the video I did of part 1 of this whole mess, I mean, his argument was all about the Dutch landowners' profit margins. Like, by that logic, he would consider it equally bad if the Dutch Parliament were to decide that the largely migrant workforce that is actually working the fields in the Netherlands actually had to be paid award wages, actually had to be getting their trade union rights and their pensions and all that shit. That would also cut into the profit margin. By Caleb's standards, that's bad. Which is what happens when you just completely abandon even the pretense that you give a shit about the working class. Yeah, I think so. I don't think that he is... he's clearly read a few things. But the thing is, he does not understand it. Well, he said it in a way that I don't... where he was saying he doesn't want the word communist because all these communists have, like, pink hair and do things like being gay and, like, not liking racism and stuff. And he said, if that's what a communist is, he doesn't want the word. And it's like, and of course, some of us have been pointing out for ages that the word just doesn't apply to him anyway. It's like when Vosh said, I'm thinking of no longer calling myself anarchism, and I forget who it was, quote tweeted him and just totally saying, yeah, that kind of fits because you clearly don't believe in it, and there's no indication that you even understand what it is.
And saying the problem is there's too many people in the world, and trying to reduce the amount of food that's put out there and trying to drive down living standards in order to stabilize the economy.
Oh, God. It's just talking points. It is just a fucking gishgalow of talking points. And these have nothing to do with what we're talking about here.
Belief that the problem isn't the irrational capitalist system that's holding back growth.
I'd say another fucking talking point. And first of all, holding back growth. As we established, he does not know what growth is. At the beginning of this video, he suggested that growth is just, like, literally growing things. That's what growth was in the economic sense. But, this thing, he keeps on coming back, he's like, yeah, see, the issue is that in capitalism, production is organized irrationally. And then he says, and we need to organize it rationally. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, he doesn't have an answer to that for the most part. But, the fact that a bunch of large landowners can hold agricultural production in the Netherlands hostage because they don't like losing some of their profits in order to take into account environmental issues. That's kind of an example of how irrational the capitalist mode of production is. That these assholes who contribute nothing to the process, who could disappear off the face of the earth and it would not change anything for the worse in terms of how agriculture works. If that's not an example of how irrational this mode of production is, I don't know what is. Yeah, it's like in Spyrobot trained on, the worst areas of Reddit.
The problem is somehow just that there's too many people in the world. Who invented the word overpopulation, Jason?
Which, okay, and he just brings everything back to this. It doesn't matter what you say. You could say, I don't think Stalin's a great model for agricultural policy, and he'd somehow managed to make that about Malthusianism.
Who invented that word? Who invented the word? Malthus.
How's this a dunk? How is that at all a fucking dunk? We all know that Malthus is the one who popularized Malthusianism. He's like the Alexander Dugin of Malthusianism. Malthus is to Malthusianism what Alexander Dugin is to Nazbols. That's what we know that. That's not. I mean, how is that a flex?
Malthusian is when you softly deny the existence of COVID.
I don't deny the existence of COVID. I've had COVID, my friend. I've had COVID. I don't deny the existence of it.
God, I mean, it's like when fucking Giuliani got prostate cancer, and prostate cancer had one fucking job that year. And prostate cancer just decided to phone it in, and we've still got the prick.
Stop it.
Restrictions oppose vaccines on it, leading...
I don't oppose vaccines. I'm vaccinated, Jason. So I don't oppose vaccines. I'm vaccinated.
Now, I had heard something about him taking anti-vax turn. Certainly, he's connected with some people who have decided to go full-on anti-vax, and in fact, anti-public health precautions, like fucking Max Blumenthal, who fuck knows what his deal is. He used to be a journalist. He used to actually make any sense. I don't think Caleb actually knows and could identify someone in the working class. He seems to define it to just mean white people with reactionary views.
Public, particularly the elderly, the already immunocompromised, so that the convenience of most and the profits of the elite can flow. That is Malthusian.
Jason, what country had the highest COVID deaths?
That would be the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is off the charts on both COVID cases and COVID fatalities. Oh god, that is a great phrase. I'm gonna have to find a use for that. 2136. I need to fucking write that down. Come back to that. I'll use that as the part of the thumbnail for the next of these. Okay, is he going to say that the U.S. is the COVID world champion? Well, I can buy that he had COVID. I mean, when you look at these events, like when he did the one in Austin that Thought Slime and Soph did, there was like one guy in the entire room wearing a mask, and it was a shitty surgical mask, which isn't particularly handy. I mean, and that just says everything about their their commitment to the working class right there. Because the working class are the ones getting completely hammered by this pandemic, because they have to go to fucking work in infectious workplaces with no mitigations, and they're not being issued proper masks. I mean, and they're not necessarily even allowed to use them. So, I mean, like, one thing that somebody who calls themselves communists, claims to care about the working class, could do is model good COVID mitigation practice and issue everybody with some, N95s at the door. Not just one, give them a couple so that they can bring them home, take them to their family, friends, or whatever. Have a few spares. Yeah, I mean, there are two levels of rational. There's rational according to one's own objectives, and capitalism is certainly rational according to its own objectives. I mean, the capitalist class, for the most part, are doing things that are reasonably calculated to achieve their main objective, which is short-term profit at whatever cost, as long as it's somebody else is fucking paying it. But then there's rationality in terms of sort of like an overall like halfway decent goal. And like when like Marx and Engels are talking about production being irrational in capitalism, they're saying compared to what ought to be a decent goal for humanity, namely making sure that people have their needs met and can enjoy a dignified standard of living and not get completely screwed over, then it's irrational. But I mean, but of course, I think like Marx and Engels would probably completely agree that in relation to its own actual objectives, capitalists are acting very rationally. That's the trouble. You can be rational according to totally irrational and like disastrous objectives, and that's precisely how we get a situation where we've got two out of control pandemics. We've got climate change is like just banging on the door, has actually put a fist through the door and is yelling, "Here's Johnny," and nothing's being done about it. And this fool doesn't want anything to be done about it, except for hoping that maybe fusion will become commercially exploitable sometime, in time for us to avoid being completely screwed. But, so there are levels of rationality, I think.
What country had the highest COVID deaths? It must have been China, right? Their evil communist policies killed everybody.
Yeah, because if there's one thing that Jason Unruhe specifically doesn't like, it's Chinese communists. The guy from Maoist Rebel News. Totally, if you want to just sort of position something as something that he obviously would dislike, it's Chinese communists, just associated with Chinese communists.
Must have been Russia, right? Must have been Cuba. Must have been Vietnam. Oh, wait. The highest COVID deaths. What country had the highest COVID deaths? Let's find out.
It is the U.S. It is the U.S. And I really hate having to give him this one. But the fact that doesn't get pointed out more often tells you a lot. Because there's this whole idea that there's just nothing that can be done to get COVID under control, and therefore there's no need to be trying to even find anything to do about it, and everybody's kind of off the hook. Nobody has to take any responsibility for their safety or anyone else's safety, and the government doesn't have to take any kind of responsibility for protecting public health, even though they claim that that's one of the things that they as a government are there for. But the minute you look at the fact that, Cuba's new cases are in the double digits, that Vietnam has done exceedingly well, that New Zealand as well, until they started loosening up, which was not a great idea, that that just wasn't warranted. China, all these places, and even in Western Europe, who is fucking it up, but just a little bit less. They're not fucking it up quite as badly as the U.S. They, pretend to care about public health a little bit more, with the exception of Britain and Sweden. All of them are doing better. And the fact that the U.S. is doing worse than everybody for whom records and data are available tells us that there is more that could be done and that it could actually work. And that's why we don't hear this. But I really, really hate that he's the one that...
Country had the highest COVID.
Let's strike that. I think it's actually... there are worse things. If there's one piece of useful information that he puts out to the rubes who end up following him and the grifters who want to pick up his detritus... I'm actually kind of glad that he's putting that one out there, because people need to know it.
The deaths. What country had the highest COVID deaths?
Also, though, it does occur to me that one question, what the fuck does this have to do with what we're talking about? But still.
According to BBC, an article published on the 12th of May, it was the United States that had the highest COVID deaths.
and has for a very long time. But what the? Okay, why? What does this have to do with the fucking Dutch farmers?
U.S. deaths were above global average. According to all the data I'm seeing, the United States had the highest COVID death rate. So if you're telling me that by criticizing U.S. policies around COVID,
which you haven't been,
I'm killing people, I've got a feeling that you're a little bit wrong.
like, okay, okay, he said, okay, fucking hell. Okay, so Unruhe said he was an anti-vaxxer. I've heard some people say that he'd taken a swing in that direction, but I haven't seen anything about it. But this is just a total tangent. I have to say, I've watched a fair bit of his stuff. I have not heard him criticizing U.S. policy on COVID. Not the U.S. refusal to do anything about it. And he pals around with fucking Max Blumenthal, who opposes any kind of public health precautions.
The U.S. government's policies on COVID have a few problems, I think. Jason needs to Google President Xi's Global Development Initiative. I guess it's degrowth, right? China building high-speed railway and hospitals all over the world is degrowth. This is fun. I love to hate people like this. So there we go. Just wanted to bring Jason on there. That's what my critics are saying now. That's a little bit fun. That's fun stuff.
Yeah, I love how Jason Unruhe gets to be the stand-in for his critics in general. Well, the thing about scientific rationality, the thing about rationality in general, is rationality can help you attain a goal. It can help you understand a problem. It can't actually, on its own, since it's mostly a process, help you decide what a good goal to have is. So it's like, if you say, like, scientific rationality lends itself to whatever objective somebody decides to put it towards. If somebody says, well, how can I do genocide better? Scientific rationality will get them there. You know, if somebody says, how can I organize production so that everybody has a decent and comfortable standard of living and we're not killing the planet, scientific rationality will get us there too. I mean, it is...
Isn't that entertaining? That's fun stuff. Jason Unruhe, everybody. The Dutch farmers.
Is that actually how he pronounces it?
The Dutch farmers are bad because they want to put out more food, and
their main agricultural export isn't actually food.
Restricting the amount of food that goes out is not degrowth, but China building hospitals and schools all over the world is degrowth.
He also didn't say that. He said that other things that China was doing that had to do with, like, rewilding agricultural lands and things like that, he said that kind of fell into the category of degrowth. He didn't say building schools and hospitals aren't degrowth.
And if you criticize U.S. government policies, that makes you Malthusian, even though U.S. government policies
That's also not
led to more COVID deaths than anywhere else.